The apartment held no light except for the harsh, artificial blue glow bleeding from the screen. James sat motionless at his desk, his posture rigid. The air in the room felt stale. Trapped between the closed curtains and the hum of the cooling fan, he stared at the glass surface of the phone, his pupils dilated to catch every flicker of data. His jaw was locked, a dull ache pulsing behind his ears. He tried to push the device away, sliding it 2 inches across the hardwood surface. The silence of the apartment pressed against his eardrums, heavy and suffocating. 5 seconds passed. He reached out, pulled the phone back, and tapped the screen to ensure the connection was still active. His fingernails tapped a rhythmic, uneven beat against the plastic casing. He was waiting for the clock to turn. The digital numbers on the corner of the display clicked toward the hour. He leaned forward, his reflection ghostly and distorted in the dark window pane, and braced his hands against the edge of the desk. The world outside remained asleep, but in the palm of his hand, the countdown to the opening bell had already begun. He exhaled a long, shallow breath and did not blink. The clock digits flipped to exactly 6 a.m. The application screen pulsed once, a sharp white flash that stung his eyes. Before the data updated, a jagged wall of red numbers cascaded down the display. Every ticker symbol he owned was bleeding value. James felt his chest tighten, a sudden restriction of breath that forced him to grip the desk edge until his knuckles turned white. His heart hammered a frantic, uneven rhythm against his ribs. The portfolio value displayed a 3% drop in a matter of seconds. Each percentage point represented weeks of effort, now evaporating in the glow of the screen. He leaned into the light, his eyes darting across the plummeting figures, searching for a single green digit, but the screen offered nothing but the relentless crimson trend. His stomach churned as the reality of the loss took hold. He felt the blood drain from his face, leaving his skin cold despite the stifling heat of the room. The numbers continued to slide, each tick downward pulling his focus deeper into the screen. He could not look away. The damage was visible, absolute, and accelerating with every passing heartbeat. The red numbers shifted again, slicing deeper into his total capital. James felt the vibration of the phone against the wood, a constant, irritating hum that mirrored his erratic pulse. His thumb hovered over the screen, trembling with such intensity that he missed the target on the first attempt. He wiped his sweaty palm against his trousers, the fabric feeling coarse and abrasive. He looked at the total loss column. It was a staggering figure that defied the logic of the previous day. He knew he should step back, take a breath, and evaluate the underlying assets. But the fear was a physical weight pressing down on his shoulders, demanding immediate release. He did not think. He did not analyze. He pressed the sell button. Then he pressed confirm. The screen flashed a confirmation message in stark, unforgiving text. The transaction completed instantly. He felt a sudden, sharp drop in his gut as the portfolio balance locked at the lower value. He pulled his hand away as if the phone were searing hot. The room felt suddenly hollow. He had successfully stopped the bleeding, but the cost was etched into the digital record. He watched the screen go dark, his own hands shaking uncontrollably in his lap. James let the phone slide from his grip onto the table, the plastic sound echoing sharply in the quiet apartment. He did not move. He lay back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the cracks in the ceiling plaster. The air in the room felt thick, stagnant, as if the oxygen had been replaced by the weight of his recent choice. He watched a single dust mote drift through a shaft of dim light, tracking it until it vanished into the shadows. This was the ritual, the explosive surge of panic, the frantic tap of the screen. And now, the hollow, heavy exhaustion that followed. It was a cycle he had perfected over months of trial and error. He tried to look away, to focus on the hum of the refrigerator or the distant sound of traffic, but his mind kept looping back to the red numbers that were no longer his. Regret seeped into his limbs, making them heavy, immovable. He felt small in the vast, dim space of the room. Every muscle in his body slackened, yet he remained braced, waiting for the next tremor of anxiety to pull him back into the fray. There was no relief in the sale, only a quiet, crushing realization of his own helplessness. James remained in the chair until the natural light failed, leaving him in a room defined by gray corners and shadows. He needed a distraction, something to anchor his thoughts away from the screen. He stood up, his legs stiff, and paced the small perimeter of his living space. His hand brushed against a stack of unread volumes near the window. He paused. He pushed aside a pile of junk mail and felt the spine of a thick, dust-covered biography. He pulled it free, the soft thud of the book hitting his palms sounding deliberate and solid. He walked to the lamp, clicked the switch, and the sudden warmth of the light illuminated the title on the cover. Warren Buffett. He had bought it months ago, convinced by a review that promised a new perspective, but he had never cracked the binding. He sat down again, the weight of the book pressing against his knees. He ran his thumb along the edge of the pages, feeling the texture of the paper. This was not a screen. There were no flickering numbers, no red alerts, no ticking clocks. It was just ink, bound together in a quiet, permanent form. He took a breath, the air in the room suddenly feeling less suffocating, and flipped the cover open to the first chapter. James flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning past the early career anecdotes until he hit the chapter titled Morning Habits. He slowed down. The text described a routine that felt alien to his own. There were no early morning check-ins with market tickers, no rapid-fire decisions fueled by pre-dawn anxiety. Instead, the pages detailed a life built on long hours of reading, deep contemplation, and a disciplined refusal to be moved by the daily noise of the world. James read a paragraph, then went back to read it again, his finger tracing the lines. He saw a man who treated his mind like a vault, protecting it from the erratic pulses of the market. The contrast sat heavy in his chest. His own mornings were spent in a state of perpetual reaction, a prisoner to the glowing screen. Here, the text suggested a different path, the quiet stability of the informed observer. He leaned back, the book resting open on his lap, and looked at the phone sitting on the table. It seemed smaller now, less significant. The frantic urge to reach for it faded, replaced by a lingering, cooling curiosity about the power of stillness. James looked from the page to the phone, then back again. The distance between the two objects felt like a chasm. He traced the words again. Stay calm. His own mornings had been a series of frantic stabs at the sell button, a desperate attempt to outrun the numbers. He stood up, the chair scraping sharply against the floor. He walked over to the table and picked up the phone. It was cold, metallic, and heavy. He did not unlock it. He did not check the charts. Instead, he carried it to the kitchen counter and placed it face down on the granite. He walked back to his desk, the silence of the room now feeling expansive rather than empty. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had been trading his own peace of mind for an illusion of control. The market was not the source of his exhaustion. His reaction to it was. He looked at the biography on his desk, the ink and paper waiting for his attention. He was no longer a spectator to his own panic. He was at a crossroads. He sat down, gripped the edge of the desk, and took a slow, deliberate breath. The cycle was broken. James sat in the quiet. He watched the dust motes drift through the light of his desk lamp, seeing them for the first time in months. The frantic pull to check the market, a sensation that had defined his early mornings for years, was still there, flickering in the back of his mind like a dying ember. He didn't fight it. He acknowledged it, then pushed it aside. He reached out and cleared his desk, pushing aside the stacks of loose papers and empty cups that usually cluttered his workspace. He laid out a clean notebook and a single pen. This was not just a change in schedule, it was a total reclamation of his morning. He stood up and paced the small room, setting the boundaries for his new life. No more pre-dawn screens. No more reacting to the noise. From this point forward, the first hour of his day would belong to study and growth. He returned to the chair and sat with his spine straight, his focus narrowing down to the desk surface. He was building a fortress against the volatility of the outside world, brick by brick, starting with the next sunrise. He was ready. The alarm clock clicked to 6. James stirred, the familiar instinct firing in his brain before he was even fully awake. His hand darted toward the bedside table, fingers groping for the glass and metal of his phone. He wanted the numbers. He wanted the red bars. He wanted the daily hit of adrenaline that his life had become. Then, his fingers brushed the empty wood. The realization stopped him cold. He pulled his hand back as if the table were burning. He sat up, his breath hitching in his chest, and looked at the empty space where the device usually rested. He climbed out of bed, his movements stiff, and walked into the kitchen. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. He picked up the phone from where he had left it, the screen dark and uninviting. He felt the weight of it, the tether to 1,000 anxieties, and set it down on the farthest corner of the kitchen counter. He turned his back on it. He walked away, leaving the device behind, his hands empty and his mind suddenly, terrifyingly quiet. He crossed the threshold back into the living room, feeling the space open up before him, stripped of its usual digital noise. James pulled the chair out. The wood groaned against the floorboards, a sound that seemed amplified in the absolute silence of the room. He sat down and adjusted the lamp, angling the light so it fell directly across the surface of the desk. Before him lay a thick financial report, its pages crisp and intimidating. Beside it, he placed a blank notebook, the white paper stark against the dark grain of the wood. The air in the room felt dense, heavy, with the absence of the constant pings and vibrations he had lived by for so long. He reached out and rested his palms on the report. The paper was cool. The texture was real. It was a stark contrast to the slick, intangible glass of the phone he had left in the other room. He opened the cover. The sound of the paper turning echoed like a gunshot in the stillness. He took a deep, slow breath, listening to the rhythm of his own pulse. He picked up his pen and held it poised over the blank page. The weight of the pen in his hand felt grounding, a tool for creation rather than a tether to panic. He looked at the first page, his eyes tracing the lines of text. The silence was no longer a void. It was a space he was about to fill with intent. He started on the first paragraph. The words were dry, technical, and lacked the immediate thrill of a price movement. He read a sentence, blinked, and realized he had absorbed nothing. The habit of scanning for volatility was still dictating his eye movement. He forced himself to start over. He leaned closer, the tip of his pen hovering over a paragraph detailing the company's supply chain logistics. He broke the text down, tracing the logic of the business model line by line. It was slow work. His eyes ached from the effort of focusing on structure instead of numbers. He reached the bottom of the page and stopped. He did not look for a ticker symbol. He looked for the source of the profit. He turned the page, the sound of the paper crisp. He encountered a complex chart regarding long-term debt and paused again. He read the footnotes. He cross-referenced the data with the narrative text. He was no longer looking for a quick exit or a sudden gain. He was mapping the foundation of the operation. The information was dense, but as he worked through the third page, the abstract data began to resolve into a clear picture of how the company actually functioned. He was learning to see the machine beneath the market noise. The text on the page remained, but James could no longer see it. A sudden, sharp itch started behind his eyes. His left hand twitched, fingers curling as if they were searching for the smooth, cold glass of his phone. The silence of the room, once steadying, now felt oppressive and thin. He felt a phantom vibration against his hip, a ghost signal that jolted his nerves. He shifted in his seat, but the restlessness followed him. His skin crawled with a frantic, buzzing energy that demanded movement. It was not a thought. It was a physical hunger. His pulse quickened, drumming against his temples. He looked at the kitchen door, imagining the phone lying on the counter, its screen dark and waiting. The urge to stand up, walk to the other room, and swipe through the live market data became a physical weight pressing against his chest. He gripped the edge of the desk. The wood was hard, unyielding. He tried to breathe, but his lungs felt tight, restricted by the sudden demand for that familiar, toxic hit of information. His jaw locked. He sat perfectly still, fighting the violent impulse to break his routine and reach for the digital fix that had defined his mornings for years. The impulse to bolt from the chair and sprint to the kitchen was a physical force, pulling at his shoulders. James stared at his hand. It was hovering in the air, trembling. Fingers clawed like a bird of prey. He did not let it reach for the phone. Instead, he forced his arm down, slamming his palm against the desk. The impact rattled the notebook. He grabbed his pen. His fingers locked around the barrel. He squeezed. He pulled his thumb inward, pressing until the tendons in his wrist corded and stood out. His knuckles turned stark white. The skin stretched thin over the bone. He shook with the effort of holding the pen still. The buzzing energy in his nerves, which had been screaming for a digital outlet, now poured into his hand. He pressed the nib into the paper. The paper buckled under the pressure. He moved the pen with slow, deliberate force, dragging it across the page in a jagged line. He held the grip until his forearm burned with fatigue. He did not look up. He did not look at the door. He kept his eyes fused to the blank sheet, his entire body acting as a dam against the tide of his own habit. He was winning the war against his own muscle memory through the sheer mechanical act of holding on. The burning in his forearm began to fade as he shifted his focus to the nib. James pressed down, dragging the metal tip across the surface of the paper. It left a dark, heavy trail. He wrote the first letter, then the second, each stroke pulling his scattered attention back into the room. He labored over every curve and line. The ink pooled slightly where he pressed hardest. He moved slowly, deliberately, forcing the erratic rhythm of his heart to synchronize with the motion of his hand. He finished the word focus. Then came the word on. He paused, his breath hitching, then continued with long term. His hand was steady now, the trembling replaced by a rigid, controlled tension. He moved to the final word, value, and traced the letters with wide, sweeping movements. He lifted the pen and went back over the line, pressing deep into the grain of the paper until the words stood out in thick, black relief. He stared at the sentence. The bold letters seemed to hold the space on the page, a physical barrier against the urge to look away. He set the pen down and placed both hands flat on the desk, feeling the solid, unmoving wood beneath his palms. The frantic energy had dissipated, absorbed into the ink. He looked at the paper again. The words stayed still. He was anchored. The calendar on the wall turned, but the routine at the desk remained fixed. Every morning, James sat down before the sun reached the window. The phone remained in the kitchen, a silent wait behind a closed door. He opened the reports. He read the balance sheets. He traced the revenue columns with his finger, testing the logic of the business against the cold figures on the page. When the morning headlines arrived, pinging against the consciousness of the neighborhood, he did not stir. He reached for his coffee, took a long, slow sip, and turned the page. The paper felt dry and steady under his touch. He began to track the companies through the seasons, noting how they weathered the minor shifts in the industry. He stopped looking for the daily surge. Instead, he looked for the underlying strength of the operation. His breathing slowed. His shoulders dropped from their defensive hunch. He developed a rhythm of study that matched the quiet of the early hours. The frantic urge to check for instant data dulled, eventually vanishing into the background of his life. He spent his mornings building a map of facts, brick by brick, word by word. He was no longer a spectator of the ticker. He was a student of the enterprise. The outside world continued its frantic cycle. Notifications pulsed in the air, a constant, low-frequency hum of digital updates and market alerts. They were ghosts of his former life, trying to claw their way back into his morning. James sat motionless, his eyes anchored to the dense, printed text of a decade-old annual report. He heard the chime of an incoming message from the kitchen, sharp and demanding. He did not look up. He traced a line of data on the page with his thumbnail, absorbing the logic of a business strategy that had endured for years. The noise of the financial world, once a siren song of panic, now sounded like distant, inconsequential static. He turned the page, the heavy paper sliding against its neighbor with a dry, satisfying sound. He opened a book on the history of industry, its spine creaking under the weight of decades of collected wisdom. He felt the shift in his own presence. The urgency that once dictated his heart rate had been replaced by a slow, deliberate cadence of thought. He read the analysis, cross-referenced the figures, and built his own understanding. The digital chatter faded, starved of his attention, until the only reality in the room was the steady, quiet rhythm of his own mind working through the facts. The morning light hit the desk with its usual clarity, but the air felt different. It carried a sharper edge. James sat with his ledger, mapping out long-term projections, when a muffled voice drifted through the open window. A neighbor was pacing the sidewalk, his phone pressed tight to his ear, voice rising and frantic. Uneven bursts about liquidity and sudden drops. James paused, his pen hovering over the paper. He did not look toward the window. He looked back at his notes. Then, he heard the rhythmic vibration of his own phone in the kitchen. It was not the usual single chime. It was a rapid-fire sequence of pings, a digital stutter that signaled something was moving in the markets. He counted the vibrations. 1, 2, 3, 4. A pause, then 5 more. A frequency was erratic, jagged, and persistent. It was the sound of a system under pressure. He tightened his grip on his pen, feeling the wood press into his palm. He took a deep breath, deliberately counting to 4, and refocused his eyes on the balance sheet before him. The world outside was beginning to fray at the edges, but inside the room, the data remained consistent. He turned the page, ignoring the insistent hum from the kitchen, and continued his work. The phone in the kitchen did not stop. It escalated. The vibrations grew into a continuous, buzzing drone that rattled the wooden surface of the counter. James stood up, walked to the doorway, and looked at the screen. The news aggregator had pushed a dozen notifications in the span of a minute. Every single one was a variation of the same aggressive theme. Crash, crisis, market meltdown, collapse. The words were bold, red, and designed to trigger an immediate, visceral reaction. They were meant to pull him back into the cycle of panic that had once defined his mornings. He saw the percentages double-digit drops in seconds. The sheer volume of the alerts created a wall of sound that demanded his attention, a digital storm intended to break his composure. James felt the weight of the device as he picked it up. The screen glowed with the intensity of a warning flare. He did not tap the notification. He did not open the app to see the ruin of his portfolio. Instead, he gripped the edges of the phone, feeling the warmth of its overheating processor, and placed it face down on the table. The buzzing stopped. The room returned to its natural state of quiet. He turned his back on the device and walked back to his desk. James sat back down, but the stillness of the room now felt heavy, almost pressurized. His palms were damp. He wiped them on his trousers, a small, rhythmic motion that felt alien to his current resolve. Without his conscious permission, his heartbeat spiked a residual echo of the panic he had worked months to dismantle. His gaze flickered toward the kitchen door. Imagining the phone lying face down on the table, its screen dark, but its potential for chaos still active. The urge to check the numbers wasn't a logical thought. It was a physical craving, a phantom limb reaching for the familiar spike of adrenaline. He pressed his knuckles into the mahogany of the desk until the bones showed white. His breath caught in his throat, shallow and rapid. He caught himself staring at the blank margin of his notebook, his pen motionless. The ghost of his former self was whispering, demanding he verify the extent of the damage, insisting that ignorance was a trap. He closed his eyes, counted the slow rhythm of the wall clock, and forced his shoulders to drop. He did not look back. He leaned into the desk, narrowed his focus to the single paragraph before him, and began to read again. The sun rose with an indifferent pale light that did not match the gravity of the morning. James stood by the window, watching the shadows retreat across his desk. The air in the apartment felt thin, charged with a strange, static pressure. He knew what was coming before the first notification arrived. It was in the way the silence hung in the hallway, heavy and expectant. Then, the phone in the kitchen erupted. It was not a single ring. It was a rhythmic, frantic vibration that traveled through the floorboards and up the legs of his chair. The device was calling out, a digital siren meant to shatter his routine. James did not flinch. He heard the sequence of alerts, the sharp, high-pitched pings that signaled a cascading failure in the markets. He felt the tremor of the table through the soles of his feet. The world outside was unraveling, numbers bleeding into red, but he kept his eyes on the grain of the wood beneath his hands. He took a long, measured breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. He reached for his book on business history, the weight of the cover firm and solid against his palms. He did not turn toward the kitchen. He opened the book, found his place, and began to read. The market did not merely drop, it cascaded. In the kitchen, the phone transformed into a frantic, living thing. It skittered across the granite countertop, its vibration producing a harsh, metallic rattle that echoed through the entire apartment. Each ping arrived milliseconds after the last, a relentless barrage of digital warnings. The frequency of the alerts increased, shifting from individual pings into a sustained, buzzing drone that filled the air. James could hear the device striking the stone surface, a chaotic percussion that marked the total liquidation of his past fears. The air in the study felt stagnant compared to the frantic kinetic energy radiating from the other room. He tightened his grip on his fountain pen, the nib pressing so hard into the paper it threatened to tear the page. He listened to the rhythmic thumping of the phone as it slid closer to the edge of the counter, pushed by the sheer volume of incoming data. The market was in a state of total freefall, a violent correction stripping away every illusion of stability. He did not rise. He did not look. He focused entirely on the ink flowing onto the notebook, anchoring his pulse to the steady, slow movement of his hand against the paper while the apartment shook with the digital carnage of the outside world. The drone from the kitchen became unbearable, a high-pitched whine of metal against stone. James pushed back his chair. The wood scraped against the floor, a sharp, singular sound that cut through the digital clamor. He walked into the kitchen, his steps slow and deliberate. The phone lay on the granite, a flickering strobe light of red and white. It skidded again, caught in a loop of incoming alerts that forced it to dance along the edge of the counter. James stopped. He stood directly over the device, his shadow falling across the screen. The glass was hot to the touch, vibrating with such intensity that the image of the stock charts appeared to blur and shudder. This was the mechanism of his old life, the engine of his past instability. Every buzz was a demand for his reaction, a command to hit a button and surrender his agency. The screen washed his face in crimson light, reflecting the chaotic movement of numbers that had once governed his every waking thought. He did not touch it yet. He simply watched it thrash, witnessing the violence of the market through the screen, observing the machine that had once held him captive. He stood motionless, his breathing steady, looking down at the device as if it were a strange, alien artifact that no longer possessed the power to command him. The phone surged against the granite, its vibration rattling the nearby coffee mug. James reached out, his fingers hovering just inches above the vibrating glass. The device felt like a live wire, pulsing with the frantic energy of a collapsing market. He did not hesitate. He hooked his index finger under the frame and pivoted the phone with a sharp, decisive motion. The screen hit the cool stone surface with a soft, dull thud. The red light vanished. The vibration ceased. The kitchen plunged into a stillness so profound it felt heavy. James kept his hand pressed firmly against the back of the phone, pinning it to the counter. He waited for the phantom impulse to lift the device and check the numbers, but his muscles remained slack. The frantic buzzing that had defined his mornings for years was now muffled, contained by the weight of his own palm. He stood there for 10 seconds, then 20, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock, a sound he had not noticed in months. He lifted his hand. The phone remained motionless. He did not glance at the screen. He turned his back on the device, leaving the chaos beneath the glass, and walked back toward the study with a steady, measured stride. James entered the study, the air cooler here, away from the hum of the kitchen. He walked to the shelf and pulled a thick, leather-bound volume from the row. The spine was worn, the edges softened by years of use. He carried it to the desk, the weight of the paper grounding his movements. His gaze flickered toward the doorway, back toward the kitchen where the phone lay, but he did not turn around. He sat down and slid the book onto the cleared surface of his workspace. The pages smelled of dust and aged ink. He opened the book to the middle, his thumbs finding the rough texture of the paper. He traced a line of text with his index finger, focusing on the history of industrial growth rather than the volatility of a single morning. The room was silent, save for the soft rustle of leaves as he turned the page. He adjusted the lamp, casting a warm, steady glow over the print. Outside, the world was moving in a frenzy, but here, the pace was measured by the turn of a page. He read the first paragraph, then the second, his eyes moving smoothly across the lines. He was no longer tracking the red lines of a screen. He was tracing the slow, deliberate climb of history. Minutes ticked by on the desk clock. James kept his eyes fixed on the dense paragraphs of the business history volume. The text was intricate, detailing the internal failures of a company during a depression. He reached a passage that required him to reread the same sentence 3 times to grasp the logic of the balance sheet. Outside, the morning light grew brighter, but he did not look toward the window. He kept his pen moving across his notebook, jotting down key figures and structural notes. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the scratch of his nib against the paper. He forced himself to analyze the company's long-term debt obligations instead of wondering if the market had bottomed out. His brow furrowed as he wrestled with the data, his attention narrowing until the only reality was the ink on the page. He flipped to the next chapter, his pace steady, his breathing rhythmic. He had committed to this hour, and he did not deviate. While the world outside burned through its capital, James dissected the mechanics of industrial endurance. He turned the page, the sound sharp and crisp in the stillness, and continued his analysis, completely insulated from the frantic shifts occurring just beyond his door. James set his pen down on the desk. He looked at the figures he had just calculated. The annual earnings, the debt-to-equity ratio, and the steady growth of the company's physical assets. He flipped back to his previous notes, comparing the current performance to the data from 5 years prior. The numbers were solid, showing a consistent trajectory of expansion. He looked at the blank space on his desk where the phone usually sat. He considered the market alerts that had buzzed earlier. Those alerts were based on price, yet the business he was analyzing had not changed its operations, its management, or its product line throughout the morning. The discrepancy hit him with the force of a physical weight. The market was a separate entity, a machine of human reaction that had nothing to do with the actual output of the factory he was studying. He stared at the ledger, realizing that the volatility was a phantom. It was a measure of sentiment, not a measure of value. He picked up his pen and drew a line through the margin of his notebook. The price could swing wildly, but the business remained exactly what it was. He understood now that he had been tracking the wrong metric entirely. The phone on the table vibrated again, a sharp rhythmic buzz against the hardwood surface. It sent a series of ripples through the water and the glass beside it. James looked at the screen. The alerts were stacked in a vertical column, flashing red updates that demanded immediate attention. He reached out, his hand hovering inches above the glass. He felt the familiar pull of the sell button, the phantom reflex to secure his position before the numbers fell further. He stopped. He withdrew his hand, curled his fingers into a fist, and placed them firmly on the desk. With his other hand, he reached out and pushed the phone face down. The screen went dark. The room returned to its previous state of quiet. He picked up his book on business history and opened it to the marker he had placed earlier. He did not check the time. He did not glance at the window to see if the market had bottomed out. He adjusted his posture, centered his notebook, and began to read the next paragraph. His breathing remained steady. He had not sold, he had not panicked, he had not broken his routine. He turned the page, the sound echoing in the stillness, and continued his work as if the world outside were not in a state of collapse. Months had passed since the morning of the crash. James sat at his desk, the computer monitor casting a steady light across his workspace. He moved the cursor to the brokerage portal, entered his credentials, and clicked the summary tab. He did not look for the daily ticker. He did not scan the news feed. He went straight to the total balance field. The number was higher than it had been before the volatility started. He scrolled down through the transaction history. It was empty for the last quarter. He checked the dates again, comparing them to his notebook entries where he had logged his decision to hold. He had made no trades, no adjustments, and no corrections during the entire period. The growth was not the result of a sudden insight or a lucky bet. It was the arithmetic sum of his patience. He leaned back, the chair creaking against the floorboards. He tapped the mouse, refreshing the page, but the numbers remained unchanged. The value had compounded while he spent his mornings reading, thinking, and staying away from the screen. He closed the browser window, leaving the glowing numbers behind. The reality of the gain sat on the desk in front of him, concrete and undeniable, proving that the most profitable action he had taken was to do nothing at all. James pushed his chair back. It rolled smoothly across the floor, coming to a stop against the baseboard. He walked to the window, the morning light hitting his face with a warmth that felt different from the harsh flicker of a monitor. He stopped and looked at the glass. The outside world was blurred, but his own reflection was sharp. He studied the lines of his face. The tension that once lived in his jaw had vanished. His shoulders were set straight, detached from the rigid, hunched posture he had held for years. He watched his hands resting at his sides, still and relaxed, no longer twitching toward a device. There was no trace of the man who used to live by the constant pulse of red numbers. That version of himself felt like a distant, frantic stranger. He leaned closer to the glass, observing the steadiness in his own eyes. He had spent his life reacting to the world, letting every shift in the market dictate his pulse and his peace. Now, he stood in the silence of his room, solid and unmoved. He looked at the reflection one last time, turned away from the window, and walked back toward his desk to begin the day on his own terms. He sat back down at the desk. The phone lay face down on the table, a dark, silent slab of plastic that no longer commanded his attention. He did not reach for it. He did not check the time. Instead, he pulled the thick book closer, the edges of the pages worn from weeks of use. He adjusted the angle of the desk lamp, casting a steady circle of light across the open text. The print was small, but he took his time, reading each sentence until the logic behind the business strategy became clear. Outside, the city began to wake, but the sounds of traffic and sirens remained distant, muffled by the walls of his room. He turned a page. The paper made a sharp, clean sound in the quiet. He placed his finger on a line of text, tracing the words as he processed the information. There was no urgency in his movements. He was not preparing for a battle against the market. He was preparing his mind for the day ahead. He took a sip of water, set the glass down with a soft click, and continued reading. He was ready for whatever the world brought, not because he anticipated the numbers, but because he had built a foundation that no ticker could shake. He turned another page, and the room remained still.